The crystal glasses clinked as Robert Morrison Sr. finished his toast, his eyes boring into mine with barely concealed contempt. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons fell silent, 200 guests frozen in collective discomfort as they witnessed my public humiliation. My husband, Robert Jr., ripped my hand under the table so hard his knuckles turned white. I'm Victoria Chin Morrison, and this is the story of how I transformed a failing family business into a $100 million enterprise, only to have my father-in-law try to destroy everything I'd built, including my marriage. To protecting family legacy, Robert Sr. continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom, and to ensuring that opportunists don't steal what generations have worked to build. He raised his glass again, making sure to catch my eye. The message was clear. I didn't belong. The irony? When I first joined Morrison Technologies 7 years ago, it was hemorrhaging money, trapped in outdated business models and failing to adapt to the digital revolution. The generations of work Robert Sr. spoke about was nearly bankrupt. I took a slow sip of champagne, remembering my first day at the company. I'd just completed my MBA at Stanford, with a background in digital transformation and a track record of turning around struggling tech companies. Robert Jr. and I had been married for 6 months, and despite his father's obvious disapproval, he convinced the board to give me a chance as head of digital strategy. The company needs fresh perspectives, my husband had argued. What he didn't say was that Morrison Technologies was 3 months away from insolvency. The company headquarters back then reflected its status. A dated office building in downtown Seattle, with worn carpet and flickering fluorescent lights. My first meeting with the executive team was telling. 8 men, all in their 50s or 60s, looked at me like I was a lost intern who had wandered into the wrong room. "Miss Chen," Robert Sr. had said, deliberately ignoring my married name, "perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on our current situation?" I stepped to the whiteboard, armed with market research, competitor analysis, and a detailed transformation strategy. For the next hour, I outlined exactly how Morrison Technologies had fallen behind, and more importantly, how we could leap ahead. Our core business, enterprise software solutions, is solid, I explained, but we're delivering it like it's still 1995. We need to move to a cloud-based subscription model, integrate AI capabilities, and build a mobile-first platform. The room erupted in objections. Our clients won't accept change. The security risks. The implementation costs. I put up my hand, silencing the room. I've already spoken with our top 5 clients. They're all considering switching to our competitors, unless we modernize. We have 3 months before we lose them forever. Robert Sr.'s face had turned an interesting shade of purple, but he couldn't argue with the facts. The board approved my plan, though I later learned he had voted against it. Over the next 2 years, I worked 80-hour weeks, rebuilding Morrison Technologies from the ground up. I hired young, talented developers, established an innovation lab, and personally met with every major client to restore their confidence. Robert Jr. supported me completely, working alongside me to transform his family's company. The results spoke for themselves. By the end of the first year, we'd stopped the bleeding. By the end of the second, our revenue had doubled. Our stock price tripled. The old office building was replaced by a modern campus in South Lake Union, complete with a roof garden and innovation center. But success, I learned, can breed resentment. As the company flourished, Robert Sr.'s attitude toward me shifted from dismissive to hostile. Every victory was attributed to the team's hard work, or the Morrison legacy of innovation. Every minor setback was blamed on my aggressive strategies and disrespect for tradition. The whispers started small. I began noticing closed-door meetings I wasn't invited to. Executive assistants who used to report to me started going directly to Robert Sr. Documents I needed for projects were mysteriously delayed. "He's just old school," Robert Jr. would say, trying to keep the peace. Give him time to adjust. But I knew better. I'd seen this pattern before in other family businesses, the old guard feeling threatened, desperately trying to maintain control. What I didn't expect was how personal the attacks would become. It started with subtle digs at charity events. "Victoria comes from such humble beginnings," Robert Sr. would tell donors, as if my middle-class upbringing was a character flaw. Then came the implications about my marriage. "Junior always had a weakness for pretty faces," he'd say at board meetings. dismissing 6 years of marriage and my Stanford MBA in one sentence. I documented everything. Every slight, every undermining comment, every suspicious financial transaction. Because there was something else going on, something beyond mere resentment. In the past 3 months, I'd noticed irregularities in our books. Large consultancy fees to companies that didn't seem to exist, technology purchases that never arrived, development projects with inflated budgets. The numbers didn't add up, and as I dug deeper, I began to understand why Robert Sr. was so desperate to discredit me. Which brings us back to tonight's gala, celebrating Morrison Technologies' 50 years of family leadership. Robert Sr. had insisted on giving the keynote speech, turning what should have been a celebration of the company's success into a thinly veiled attack on me. As he finished his toast, I caught the eye of James Chen, no relation, our newly appointed head of internal audit. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Tomorrow morning, the forensic audit team would arrive. Their investigation would take exactly 3 days. I looked around the ballroom, taking in the faces of people who had watched my public humiliation in uncomfortable silence. The board members who had approved Robert Sr.'s decisions without question. The executives who had stepped aside as he systematically tried to push me out. Victoria, my mother-in-law Diana, touched my arm gently. She at least had the grace to look embarrassed by her husband's behavior. Perhaps you should head home. You look tired. I smiled, keeping my voice steady. Actually, I think I'll stay. Tomorrow's going to be a very interesting day at the office. Robert Jr. squeezed my hand again, this time in solidarity. He didn't know the details of what I discovered. I protected him from that knowledge deliberately, but he knew me well enough to recognize when I had a plan. As I watched Robert Sr. holding court with his sycophants, I thought about everything I'd sacrificed for this company. The long hours, the missed vacations, the delayed plans for starting a family. I'd given Morrison Technologies everything I had, turned it from a failing enterprise into a technological powerhouse. Tomorrow, Robert Sr. would learn exactly what that meant. Tomorrow, he would discover that his attempt to destroy me had only ensured his own downfall. Because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last 3 months building an ironclad case. Every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence carefully preserved and verified. The forensic audit was just the beginning. I raised my own glass in a quiet toast, hiding my smile behind a crystal rim. In exactly 72 hours, the true story of Morrison Technologies would come to light, and then we'd see who the real opportunist was. The next morning, I arrived at Morrison Technologies at precisely 7:00 a.m. The modern glass building reflected the early Seattle sunrise, its windows still dark except for the top floor. Robert Sr.'s office. He was already there, probably wondering why he received an urgent email about an unscheduled board meeting at 9:00 a.m. I stepped into my office on the executive floor, noting how my nameplate had been removed from the door sometime during last night's gala. A petty move, but telling. On my desk sat a formal letter, likely another attempt to marginalize my role. I didn't bother opening it. Instead, I opened my laptop and sent a pre-prepared email to the entire executive team. Mandatory emergency meeting, Boardroom A, 9:00 a.m. External auditors present. Attendance required. At 8:15, James Chen arrived with his team from internal audit, accompanied by representatives from Deloitte. I'd worked with James for 6 months, ever since I first noticed the financial irregularities. He was meticulous, discreet, and most importantly, incorruptible. Everything's ready, he said, setting up his equipment in the boardroom. The evidence is substantial. I nodded, thinking about the 3 months of careful investigation that had led to this moment, and the external verification. Complete. The forensic accountants have confirmed every transaction. By 8:45, executives begin filtering into the boardroom, their faces showing varying degrees of confusion and concern. Robert Sr. arrived last, at precisely 9:00 a.m., his expression darkening when he saw the auditors. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, remaining standing as others took their seats. I wasn't informed of any audit. Please sit down, Robert, I said calmly, using his first name intentionally. The board will want to hear this. The board? He scoffed. I am the board chairman, and I did not authorize. Actually, James interrupted, sliding a document across the table. This audit was authorized under Section 7.2 of the corporate bylaws, triggered by suspicious financial activities flagged by our monitoring systems. The color drained from Robert Sr.'s face as he finally sat down. Robert Jr., seated beside me, looked confused but resolute. I protected him from this knowledge, knowing his position would be stronger if he was clearly uninvolved. Over the past 3 years, James began, pulling up the first slide. We've detected a pattern of irregular financial transactions totaling approximately $42 million. The room erupted in murmurs. James continued, his presentation methodical and damning. These transactions were disguised as consulting fees, technology purchases, and development projects. However, when we traced them, he clicked to the next slide, showing a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Every single transaction led back to entities controlled by Robert Morrison Sr. and his private holding company, Morrison Heritage LLC. Robert Sr. jumped to his feet. This is absurd. I built this company. Actually, I cut in, standing slowly. Let's talk about who built what. I nodded to James, who switched to my presentation. 7 years ago, Morrison Technologies was 3 months from bankruptcy. Our stock was trading at $3.42. Our major clients were leaving. Our technology was outdated. I clicked through slides showing the company's transformation. Today, we're worth $100 million. Our stock closed yesterday at $78.25. We have a 2-year client waiting list. I turned to face Robert Sr. directly. You call me a gold digger? Let's look at who really tried to steal from this company. The next hour was brutal. James and his team laid out years of financial manipulation. Robert Sr. had been systematically siphoning money from the company, using increasingly sophisticated schemes to hide his tracks. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. The irregular transactions began exactly 1 month after our stock price first doubled. I explained to the stunned board. Every major company's success was followed by a new scheme to divert funds. While I was building the company up, you were quietly tearing it down. Robert Sr.'s face had turned an alarming shade of red. You have no proof. Actually, James interrupted again, distributing thick folders to each board member. We have extensive proof. Bank records, shell company registrations, forged authorizations. The SEC has already been notified. You set me up, Robert Sr. snarled at me. You gold-digging bitch, you planned this from the start. Dad, Robert Jr. stood up, his voice sharp. That's enough. But I held up my hand, calm in the face of his rage. No, let's address this. Yes, I married your son. Yes, I joined your company. But let's look at what each of us did afterward. I worked 80-hour weeks to save this company. I modernized our technology, rebuilt client relationships, and increased our value by 2,000%. You? I smiled coldly. You stole $42 million and tried to destroy my reputation to cover your tracks. The board members were flipping through the evidence, their expressions shifting from shock to anger. Morrison Technologies had strict rules about financial impropriety, rules that Robert Sr. himself had helped write. There's something else, James added, pulling up one final slide. We found evidence of insider trading. Mr. Morrison Sr. has been selling company secrets to competitors, including proprietary code from our new AI platform. That revelation broke the last thread of support Robert Sr. might have had. The board members looked at him with undisguised disgust. This wasn't just theft. This was betrayal of everything the company stood for. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence, said Margaret Chen, again, no relation, our longest-serving board member, and to notify law enforcement. The vote was unanimous. Security was called. As they escorted Robert Sr. from the boardroom, he turned to make one final attack. You'll regret this, he spat at me. You're nothing without the Morrison name. I smiled, thinking of the contract in my desk drawer. Actually, as of this morning, Morrison Technologies is now officially MT Global. The board approved the rebranding last month. I paused, savoring the moment, and I'm still Victoria Chen. I never took your name. The next few weeks were intense. The press had a field day with the story of corporate theft and betrayal. Robert Sr. was indicted on multiple charges of fraud and insider trading. The company's stock dipped briefly but recovered quickly once the full story emerged of how the theft had been discovered and stopped. Robert Jr. struggled with the revelation of his father's crimes, but our relationship emerged stronger. "You protected the company," he said one night as we sat in our home overlooking Lake Washington. "You protected our future." "Our future," I agreed, touching my stomach gently. We hadn't announced the pregnancy yet. There had been enough news lately. 1 year later, I stood at a podium in the same ballroom where Robert Sr. had tried to humiliate me. The company had just crossed the $250 million valuation mark. Our ad platform was revolutionizing the industry, and I was announcing our new charitable foundation dedicated to supporting women in technology. "Success isn't about names or legacy," I told the assembled crowd. "It's about vision, hard work, and integrity." Sometimes those who accuse others of being opportunists are simply projecting their own failures. Diana Morrison, who had divorced Robert Sr. after discovering he hidden money from her too, sat in the front row, holding my 6-month-old daughter. Robert Jr. stood beside me at the podium, our united front now stronger than ever. As I looked out over the crowd, I thought about that night 2 years ago, when Robert Sr. had tried to destroy me with a toast. He called me a gold digger, an opportunist, a thief. Now he was serving time in a federal prison, while I led the company he'd nearly destroyed into a new era of innovation and growth. Sometimes I mused, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about rising so far above your detractors that they become nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder that true success comes not from stealing and scheming, but from creating real value. And as I raised my glass for a toast of my own, I smiled at the thought that somewhere, in a federal prison cell, Robert Sr. might be reading about MT Global's latest success in the financial papers, about the company that had flourished not because of his name, but despite it. "To the future," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room, "and to building something that lasts." The crowd raised their glasses, and this time, there was no discomfort in their silence, only respect, admiration, and the shared understanding that sometimes the person they try to push out the door might just be the one holding the whole house up. Robert Jr. squeezed my hand as we left the podium, and I thought about how far we'd come, from the daughter-in-law they tried to marginalize to the CEO who saved and transformed their company, from the gold digger to the industry leader. Sometimes I realized they hand you the very tools they think will destroy you, never realizing you'll use them to build something greater than they could have imagined. And that, as I learned, was the sweetest revenge of all.